In this video I'm going to show you how to alter a dress pattern to make the design you can see here in the picture. And you need a certain kind of pattern. I used the basic dress pattern as a starting point, but you can use other patterns if you have. It needs to be, so the bodice needs to be fairly tight fitting. This wouldn't work if the bodice is really loose, and it probably needs to have sleeves. The original had long sleeves. I think short sleeves would also work, but well, no sleeves at all. It would look a bit odd, I think. And the fabric needs to be fairly thick, so that those pieces, they can get floppy if the fabric isn't sturdy enough, and of course those pieces are attached together, and I'll come to that nearer the end of the video. But sturdy fabric, and preferably single color. I think this is the kind of design where you don't want anything else in the dress. You want the focus to be on this part of the dress, and the rest should be just single color, sort of classic design, nothing crazy. Just make people look at this part of the dress. This is the main point, and the rest should be just simple, clean, one color, nothing wild. And also the pattern should have a seam at the waist, because the easiest way to do this is to just alter the front of the bodice. It gets a bit complicated if you need to alter also the lower part of the dress. So the way I did this one you can see in this picture, I altered the front of the bodice and made one small change in the back, but nothing else. So that's what I'm going to explain. This is a basic dress pattern. It's what you use as a basis when you start altering the pattern to whatever you are planning to make. And for the yellow one, I used these parts of the pattern and altered them as required. So I've made copies of these parts from waist up, and I'm going to show you how to alter the patterns to make the yellow piece. But first, here are the actual pattern pieces I used for the yellow color, and there's the back on the left, and the 3 pieces on the right are for the front. And this is what we'll have once I'm finished showing you how to do this. One more thing before we start. I'm going to assume that you know how to make a dress with lining, or at least you have instructions for how to do that. So I'm only going to explain what needs to be changed. Starting from the back. This is bodice back, and I'm going to show how the changes, and I'm going to use different color for the changes so they'll be easier to see. So in this case we need to close this dart and move it here, because in the front the seams, they radiate from this edge, and it would look odd if this dart was here. So it goes here, and you just select an angle you think looks good. So maybe we'll put it here like this, and we're going to cut here. These are scissors. These help to know where to cut. And then this we're going to cut here and move this here. So these are the normal pattern markings you make when you make alterations. So, and then we cut. And the idea here is that you don't cut all the way to this tip here. Leave just enough to keep this piece attached to the pattern. Cut along these lines here. This, it's still attached here. If you cut it all off, it doesn't matter. You can still just glue it in place. But it's easier when you can just pivot it around at this point. Then just a bit of glue here, like this, and then you glue this piece so that these lines go together. Okay, I'm out of the picture now. So, and this is all you need to do for the back piece. When I made the yellow piece, I also removed this dot here, but you're making an entire dress, so you need this dot. So this is the back piece, and then the next thing I would do normally is cut this off. Really, you don't need to. In this case, it's so small. I would put a little piece of paper here so I could draw the seam allowances around this piece, because I like putting them there. You don't forget the seam allowances when you draw them into your pattern, but it's not necessary, but it is very useful, because I certainly have forgotten seam allowances more than once. But this is the back piece, and then we move to the front, and that's a whole lot more work. So this is the front piece, and the first thing that needs to be done here is to remove this dart. So you cut here and move this here, and then cut here this dart open, because this is going to be a lot bigger when you close that one. So let's cut it here, and once again, don't cut all the way through, just leave these halves attached at that point a little bit, just enough to keep them together, but not so much that this piece doesn't turn. Okay, and then I'll take some glue here and turn this here. there's a minor problem with that basic pattern, and that's the angle here. It shouldn't be there, so this needs to be straightened. So this part here is going to go away. So, and this dart is really the reason why you should use single color, because if you have patterns in the fabric, it could look strange with a dart as big as this. Okay, let's change to another color, because now we need to make those V shapes here along the neckline. And normally this would be on fold, but in this case it isn't, because this is going to be divided into 3 parts and then mirrored another 3 parts, so it's 6 parts in the front. And how deep this is the deepest V shape the design has, and how deep it goes is really a matter of preference and also a matter of your size and body shape, because different lengths look good on different people. So it's very much about the length of your torso and the bust size. Those really define where that V shape should stop. So we'll just put it there. In this case, that's just to put it somewhere. You'll need to decide for yourself where you want it to go. And in the neckline, the gaps were 1 centimeter, so this needs to go 1/2 centimeter because it's going to be doubled, so half of the width here. And this marking here is important because this is what's going to tell you where to stop sewing when you're sewing this thing all together. I'll explain that later, but this marking is important. It needs to be there. And then we'll just mark this as part to be removed. And then the next one here is the dart. So the seam is going to go here, so it will continue from the tip of this dart to the neckline. And I didn't really measure the places where these went. I just put them where I thought they looked best. So let's say the seam goes here, and then you need the V shape, and this was shorter than this one, so we could put it, let's say, here. Yet again, marking here, and then here 1/2 centimeter both sides. So this is the middle of the gap, and then you draw a line from these markings to this one. So this is second V shape, so this will be removed. And then the third one, in the original it was about 1/3 down from here, so it would be, and then where it goes in the neckline, well, you just decide where you want it. So let's say it's here. So this is a seam, and yet again it's shorter than these two. So let's put it here, another marker there, and then 0.5 centimeters here. Like this. And this is going to be removed. So now that's really it. Then we can cut these pieces. First, this is not going to be a dart anymore, this is just a seam, and it will go here. And that V shape is going to be removed. So cutting from here and then removing this half of the darts. Way. And then cutting here. And then removing this part. Then we'll straighten this edge. And at this point it's probably a good idea to just mark these. 1, 2, 3. The numbers will, well, they'll show you the order, and they'll also show you which way is up, because especially this piece, it can be deceiving. You start thinking it's this way and it can get confusing, so it's better to have something there to show you which way is up. That's one piece. Second one, and then removing this once again. And here are the pieces needed, and when you put this here, you can see there's the V shape, and there's the V shape, and there are some things you need to take into consideration when you sew the pieces together, and I'll tell more about that in a bit. But these are now Well, not quite finished. At this point, normally I would glue these to pattern paper and draw the seam allowances around just to make sure I won't forget them, and then they are ready. But I'm not going to do that now because I already showed you the patterns I used for the yellow piece, and those had the seam allowances, so you can look at that to see how that goes. When you have the patterns finished, you need to cut the fabric, and you need some interfacing, and here I have marked these parts. You should use the pattern to cut the interfacing because these lines need to be accurate, because once you have the fabric pieces and the interfacing, you should put them, let's see here, you should put the interfacing, attach it so that its edges go exactly where you're going to sew. Like you can see here, this is the part without seam allowances, and the seam allowances are here, and you have to sew exactly along these lines. These are the markers from this pattern. So once you have the pieces for the bodice and the interface pieces in place, all of them, you need to start sewing the entire thing together. And the first thing is to sew from, well, the first things would be these middle pieces. You sew from this marking down to the waistline, and then the next one you sew from this marking down to the waistline, and then here you sew from this marking here to the edge, and you need to sew all 6 pieces together so you have an entire bodice, and then you do the same thing to the lining except for the interfacing. That's only on the outer fabric. And I'm going to sew these 2 pieces together because this is just a little piece to demonstrate how to sew this neckline. So first, of course, I'll need to sew these together, both the outer, and then I have here underneath the lining fabric. So from aligning these marks, aligning these marks, and then sewing from this mark down to the edge. In this case it's a really short piece, and basically when you align this neckline here, these marks should also align, but if they do not, then you have marked something wrong and you need to check where the problem is. But the main thing is that you sew exactly from this marker down to the waistline, but in this case I'm only going to sew these 2 pieces together. In case you were wondering about these lines, the edges of the interfacing pieces. This is just to make sure that the interfacing doesn't show on the outer side of the fabric. It might, and if you have straight lines, it will show clearer. So if you cut the edges like this, there's less chance of it showing through, and you don't need to draw these jagged lines in the pattern. You can make just straight lines and cut the pieces like that, and then just sort of freehand cut the edges like this. But the main thing is that it's just to make sure the interfacing doesn't show as it shouldn't. But now I have these two pieces, lining and the outer, and the main thing when sewing these seams is that they should be at exactly the same height, same distance from the neckline, or if they are not, it's the lining that can be a bit lower, not much. If it's a couple of millimeters, it doesn't matter, but more than that and it's going to be a problem. But the next step will be to, well, of course the next step is that once you have the bodice, all 6 pieces sewn together, then you just sew the outer part of the dress and you sew the lining, all pieces together. And then when you're sewing the lining to the dress and you get to the neckline, that's where the next part is going to be important. And the next part is that when you start sewing this lining in place, you're gonna do it in parts. Like here there would be another piece here, so there's similar part here, and you start at the marker here and you sew along this line or along the edge of the interfacing. That's really handy. You don't need to draw any lines if you use the interfacing, because if you place the interfacing correctly, you can just sew along its line, its edges, and you get everything right. And then here you need to fold all these away so they don't get caught into anywhere, and you stop here at the marker. You need to stop entirely, cut the threads, and then you go to the other side, and again you make sure that there's none of these pieces are underneath, and you start from this marker and you sew all the way to this marker, and then you stop again and you do the same thing for this entire neckline. So if you're coming from this side, you come here, you get to this point, you stop, start again here, and sew here, stop, and start again here, and so on until all 6 pieces are sewn together. So I'm going to sew 1/2 of this and show what it looks like after that. Well, I've sewn both sides now, and one thing I didn't remember to mention earlier was that here this stitches, this should, of course it's the marker where it starts and stops, but you need to pay attention to these stitches because these two can't overlap. So when you start going that way, it needs to start exactly where the last stitch of this seam is. That's the optimal situation. Of course in this one it didn't really go quite that nicely because, as you can see, there's a horrible mess here. I don't know what's going on with my sewing machine. I need to look at it a bit closer. Maybe it's the thread, I'm not sure, but it's making a mess. But then once you have the whole neckline sewn this way, actually all the sides that you need to sew when you're attaching the lining, then when you're turning the entire thing right side out, you need to just which way are we going? Let's go this way. Just fold these seam allowances like this. I found that it's neatest when you do it this way. Going to turn it the right side out and try to keep those seam allowances like they were. This isn't the easiest thing to do because these are quite narrow. But you just, that's not, I'm not going to start fighting with those corners. You need to just do a bit of work with this when you're turning it around, because those corners can be tricky. You could use something fairly sharp, but not so sharp that you're poking holes into the neckline. No. Well, I suppose that's enough. So, well, that isn't neat, but it doesn't matter. Now let's see if this is okay. So at this point, what you need to do is just turn these neatly. These aren't turned very neatly, but good enough for this purpose. And then you need to press all these seams so the lining won't show on the outside. And that's the reason why the end of this seam here can't be any lower than it is in the lining, because if it's higher in the lining is going to show on the outside. But if it's a bit lower here on the lining side, there's just going to be a tiny hole here, but that doesn't matter because it's in the lining and it won't show. But yeah, that's it. You just press these neatly so the lining stays on the inside, doesn't show on the outside. And of course, if you wish, you can stitch along these edges, but I thought it looked nicer without the stitching. I can actually show you. Here's the practice piece I made for the yellow one. So this is how it's supposed to look. So, and the reason why it's good to either draw the lines in the fabric or use the edges of the interfacing is that here, this slight curve here at the top of these pieces there in the neckline, it's really hard to make if you just try to follow the edge of the fabric. It's best if you have something to guide you when you're sewing these parts. And with these, it's just important to have straight lines so it looks nice. And here you can see the lining side, and it's not quite not as good as it could be, but this was just a practice piece. I can tell you that the finished one looked a bit better even on the lining side. But yeah, that's how you do it. And now I have a bit more about this pattern making. I've been thinking ever since I made that yellow piece, I've been thinking that what will you do if you have a dress pattern that doesn't have a waist seam? And I thought it couldn't be done, but I've been now thinking about it for quite some time, and I think I figured it out, and next I'm going to try and see if what I've been thinking actually works. One more thing before getting into the alternative pattern. You need to find a way to keep the neckline pieces in place. They won't stay in place all by themselves. So what I did was I used this sewing thread. It's transparent. It's like very thin fishing line. And so in this picture you can see, hopefully, that I have put that in first in one corner, couple of knots there, then going over the gap and measuring that the width of the gap is correct, and then couple knots in that corner, and then going under the lining fabric to the next corner, couple of knots, going over the gap, measuring that it's as wide as it's in the pattern, and then couple of knots there, and so on, all the way from the first corner in the side to the last corner in the other side. So just this thread is keeping the gaps the way they should be and keeps the edges from flopping forward. And what I wanted to use for this was the sort of clear elastic tape, which is used for, I think, underwear or something like that, and that would have been better probably, but I couldn't find that from the storage at school, so I ended up using this transparent thread, and it works, but I'm not quite sure how it would feel against your skin, so that clear elastic tape probably would be better for something you're wearing for longer time. These pieces were just for put it on, take a picture, take it off, so there was no need to worry about if it's gonna scratch your skin or something like that. And there may be some other solutions for this problem, but you need something that will keep the neckline together. Okay, and now to the pattern. So here I have another copy of the basic pattern, and to remove the waist seam, this dart needs to be left untouched. Can't do anything to it. So I was thinking about it for quite a long time, and then suddenly I realized that this is really simple, because this is where we can move that dart. So this is the middle V shape on this half piece, and we're going to cut here, this open, and then we're going to cut here and move this here. So this dart will be here, and then before I'm cutting anything, I'm going to draw these lines to get the V shape here in the correct place where it belongs. Yeah, and I could also draw that one. I have already marked the places for these lines beforehand, so I don't need to worry about those, just use the markings I have here. And this will go away. And I'll mark that one after I first cut it, because this way it's easier to see the line. So cut here, go close to the tip, but just leave a little bit so it won't be cut off entirely. Okay, and then let's turn it this way, and we need some glue here. Turn this so it follows this line. Okay, so now we have the dot here, and then this part will be the V shape. So this will be cut off. And then we just need the third one, which goes here. And how long is it? I'm using these original patterns so we can then compare them once I'm finished with this. It shouldn't be different, it should be same kind of pieces. So this goes away, and then when you cut these pieces, you go here and here, and then this one goes here and then here. So this piece will go away. It won't be a dot because there will be a seam all the way down to the hem. These are the pieces, and let's see now. I have here the patterns I made using the first method, and this is similar as it should be, and so is this. Maybe minor differences due to not having the markings in exactly the right places, but as you can see, yes, and this, well, that's because this line here isn't straight as it should be. So once again we'll just straighten that. And it's the same. So different method but same result. So you can use this method even if you have the waist seam. It doesn't matter how you make the pattern because the result is the same. But if you don't want the waist seam, then you need to use this method, and I'm going to show you. I have the basic pattern here. Let's see, I need to get it into the picture a little bit more. Okay, so now a bit there, so let's put this on top of this here. There's the waist seam. So if you make it this way, that no waist seam, then when you go to this lower part, you just cut along this edge of the dart, and then you go straight down here and you get a full length piece for the front, and this here goes along the same line, so you have two pieces for half of the front, so 4 pieces in all for the front. And I'm not sure how that would look like, if it would be nice, and well, it's really up to you. And then I've been thinking about this back piece. I have here the one where I move the dart, and I was thinking, if you have 4 pieces for the front, what do you want to do with the back? You can have, it really depends on where you put the zipper, but let's say the zipper is here in the center back. You can have it in 2 pieces with the zipper in the center, and the lower part could have something, the zipper goes somewhere here, and then there's a seam for the rest of the back. But if you want to, you can make the back also out of 4 pieces, and you just cut this from the tip of the dart to the tip of this dart here, and then go along this line and then straight down and here. So you just remove this part in the middle as you cut the back to 2 pieces, and 2 pieces for the half, 4 pieces for the entire back. And it's really up to you. It's easy to do. All it requires is that you sew a couple of extra seams if that's the way you want it to be. And yeah, it was really easier than I thought, making it this way. I don't know why it took me so long, but I'd say this is the easier way of doing this, dividing this into 3 parts. But well, you do it. either way, depending on if you have waist seam or not. But that's all about this design, I think. I'm not going to make this myself, it's not something I would wear, but hopefully this video will be of use to somebody.